Are we good?
We're good.
All right.
Awesome.
Welcome to FrameOne. I'm Drysen. Today I'm hanging out with Alex Parker, who is the owner and runs Ladybird Animation. You are also on contract full-time with Disney Parks.
Yes.
And I recently learned you have a Master's of Art.
I do.
Yeah.
Master of Art in 3D computer animation.
So I'm a little curious. When did you graduate from college?
2016 was undergrad. 2017 was my master's.
And when did you start Ladybird?
2020.
It's like 3 years of out of school, and I'm going to be my own boss.
Yeah. When you put it like that, it sounds really good.
It sounds really impressive, really.
Yeah.
So one thing I've recognized is a lot of people who go freelance, they have some working experience, 5, 6, 7, 10 years in the industry before they make the leap to freelance. You short tracked that. How does that feel? Like, what did you go through, and how was your experience starting Ladybird like that?
It's a great question. I think I had a lot of unique circumstances that all kind of came together and dominoed into that. And one of them was it took a long time for this to feel like a fortunate experience, but I had a really, really crappy job right out of school. It took a long time to find a job, and then my first job just wasn't good.
Yeah.
And then my second job, by contrast, I absolutely adored. So I had this really unique experience of truly learning what not to do and how not to run a studio, which at the time was miserable to go through, but I learned so much in that 9 months. And then I was really fortunate to land a job that I loved and I adored, and I could learn instead what makes a successful studio. So those two worked together really well. It took a long time to appreciate
Kind of that fire and ice. You get both sides of the story.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it was equally important to learn both. And so both really, really valuable experiences. And then it was the unique combination of like getting married, moving, and COVID-19 that all came together and forced.
It's kind of a lot of life happening at once.
Truly, truly. And so that's kind of the pinnacle, like crossroads that forced me to make a decision. And freelance was really the only viable answer. And so that's kind of where Ladybird came from, was like out of necessity. If I wanted to keep supporting myself as an animator, it needed to be through a remote solution, a remote freelance solution. And so that's where it came from.
So you basically just said, I need a job, so I'm going to make it my own job.
Yeah. Yes.
Was that scary, like making that leap and being in that situation?
It was. And I think because it was my only choice, that's what made it a little less scary. If I'd had an easier option, I think I might have taken it and I wouldn't have made Ladybird. So it was a unique set of circumstances.
That plays out like that, where you're just like, okay, this is a necessity. It's happening.
Right.
I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it happen.
Truly.
Were you confident in your abilities to make it happen?
It was a very quick cycle of like confidence quickly followed by and then like, oh no, that worked. I'll do it again. So very quick cycles, but yeah.
Okay. Well, tell me about the early years of freelancing with as your company Ladybird. What were your clients like? What was the process like? Did you have things figured out ahead of time, or did you just kind of figure it out as you go?
So I did a fair amount of like reading and podcast listening before I started, simply because I knew it was coming.
Yeah.
I'd kind of been in a headspace for a while at my old job where I had been kind of flirting with the idea of freelance for a little bit,
Okay.
knowing I'm going to have to move and I can't work in-house anywhere where I'm going to move.
Right.
So I had kind of spent those last few months at my job, like really intentionally absorbing, like, how does my producer talk to clients and how does my creative director talk to
Smart.
clients? Yeah. And like really trying to look at my job through that lens. And that was really helpful. And so from there, it was a lot of like, Chris Doe's podcast. It was a lot of the Chutzpah freelance book that got me through, Joey Kornman's book. And so a lot of those resources kind of made me feel like I had like studied for the test, you know, and then going into it, it was very much just baby steps and hoping that was the right thing to say, hoping that was the right thing to do. And luckily it usually was. So then it just became a game of like trusting that my instincts were in the right place and taking bigger baby steps and just going from there.
There you go. I'm curious then. So before you left, because you had this looming deadline, you knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
Did you take time to develop your client list ahead of time? Did you have things lined up before you left, or was it like cold turkey day one? We have to figure this all from scratch.
So I had this grand plan because I was working in Uptown Dallas at the time, knowing that I was going to move to Bryan, Texas, which is just like not the place to be as a motion designer. But I had kind of this pre-existing network of like loose contacts in Dallas. And so my grand plan was going to be, before I moved, to go hand out like goodie packages to each of these studios and like shake hands and say, hey, before I go fully remote, here's me as a person, here's who you'd be working with, and kind of set that up for myself.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to me, a pandemic was happening. And so absolutely none of that happened. It was very much, I just like evaporated from Dallas into College Station with no real in-person contacts. And I think my network was a lot stronger than I thought it was. But it was very much cold turkey. I live in a different place now. I have to start from scratch immediately. So that was really scary.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
relate. That was kind of my story
That
as
was
well.
not my plan. Yeah.
How did it go? Like day one, I mean, obviously we're here. It worked out in the long run. But those first few months, I mean, did you guys have a cushion of savings to fall back on? Was it just making phone calls? How did that process work?
Yeah, so I was really lucky to have saved up and to be in kind of a safe place to be doing
Yeah.
this type of new exploration. And it was really, really sweet that my very first client was my old job.
Oh, that's cool.
So that was really that's like your big brother, like reaching out and
Yeah.
teaching you how to drive. You know what I mean? Like it was
Yeah.
a really sweet first client, and I was really nervous. And I was texting my dad because he runs a lot of his own practice, so he knows all this. I was like, Dad, I'm so embarrassed that my first invoice is numbered 00001. That's humiliating. And he was like, well, it's your first invoice. And I was like, I know, but that's embarrassing. And he was like, well, if your first client is your old job, don't you think of all people they know that this is your first freelance job? It's like, yes, Dad. You're right, as always. So yeah, it was a really gentle transition. And then it started branching out. And then eventually got to a place where I was working with people that I'd never met before.
Okay.
And that was kind of when I felt like Ladybird had a presence.
Did it take a long time for that to happen?
It didn't take as long as I thought it would, to be totally honest. And that was really shocking to me. So
What do you think was responsible for that?
that's a good question. Honestly, I think LinkedIn was maybe a big part of it. And that doesn't feel like a glamorous answer, but I feel like that's most likely where it came from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it just sharing your work? Was it being vocal? What about your online presence really helped push that?
I think it was first and foremost just sharing work that I had done. And then I think being really involved with the MoGraph community and supporting other artists when, like, just cheering people on when they're doing well, I think inadvertently put me in contact with other people that needed that same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very organic process, I think.
So as things were unfolding, were a lot of your clients local to like the Dallas or the College Station area, the Fort Worth area, or was it, across the country?
When I first started, most of them were like Dallas based, very, very familiar. And then most recently, this has happened 2 times now. I've gotten clients who thought I was British, and I cannot explain that. Absolutely not. We get into a meeting, and I know that they're from the UK because I can see their email ends in co.uk, whatever.
Right.
And we get in this meeting, and they're like, doing introductions, saying hello. And right off the bat, they're like, you're not British? I say, no, what makes you think that? And my mom was like, what did you say to make them realize you weren't British? And I was like, hi. That's how I introduced myself on an email. And that's when they were like, oh, I don't think she's British. Because I said hello in that terrible way. So that's what I'm learning, is my client base is quickly growing, and they have no idea where I live.
I was just very curious if maybe your branding was just uniquely UK, uniquely British.
I really think that it's because my website, and it's ladybirdanimation.co.
Oh.
I think that might be part of it.
Yep.
Which is my own doing, but
Hey, it's just now you're worldwide.
truly, I've had 2 clients, one British one, and then one new German client ask, "Yeah, you're not in the UK?" And I say, "I'm sorry, no, to disappoint. I'm down the road from an HEB."
Did
So
they go through and book you anyway?
yes,
That's a good
yes, they
feeling.
did.
That's a good feeling.
It really was. Yeah, loved them both.
So I'm curious, as your projects are starting out as freelance, typically like you were working at a smaller, lesser day rate or lesser project rate, trying to work your way up to bigger, better things.
Mm-hmm.
Was that still the case for you as well? Did you start with a lower day rate, or did you
Yes.
like I'm gonna go shoot for the moon right off the bat?
So I started with a rate that I had kind of pulled from Joey Kornman's Freelance Manifesto. I just kind of pulled together details from there and said, okay, if A plus B equals C, this feels like a reasonable place to start. And so what I did was just kind of kept a spreadsheet where I would give that rate to studios and then write down their reaction to it, and then adjust from there. So if I had a lot of studios agreeing immediately, that's when I realized, like, I think I might be lowballing a little bit.
Yeah.
And then realizing that the studios that pushed back, it wasn't always because my rate was too high. It was sometimes just because those were studios that I had outgrown at this point.
That's a really hard thing to experience though,
Yes.
because you're like, oh, you gave me money previously. I
Yes.
like money. How did you how did you face those problems?
I think I had to take very, very like distinct steps in telling myself that that part of the business is not personal. That because everything's personal to me, everything. But that part I had to tell myself isn't. And so it was a very objective, like, hi, so glad to hear from you. Friendly update. Here's my rate. And it's different from what we're used to. And that's where I'm at. And a lot of studios took that as no issue at all. And that kind of reinforced, like, this isn't personal. This is the business side.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Did you experience a lot of clients starting to push back at a certain point, or was it just a kind of a gradual transition and you started to see things filter off?
It was, I think, very gradual. I think once I had been doing work at that rate for a little bit and it was comfortable and my clients were very familiar with that number, some of them honestly I didn't change. Some of them they had been with me from the beginning and I really respected that. So I let them
Yeah.
stay at that rate and that doesn't bother me at all. It's with newer clients that I say, you know what, like my time is more limited. Therefore, this new number is where we're going to start. And that has kind of slowly shaken itself out into a nice equilibrium.
I think that's an important thing to state, that you don't have to have the same rate for everybody. You can
Right.
kind of pick and choose, like, hey, I like working with these guys. Maybe I'll give them a lesser rate for XYZ reason, like your original clients were.
Exactly. Yeah, they know what to expect and we've got a good rhythm and I'm happy for that to stay there.
So when you jumped into freelance, because you had a limited time in the full time workforce, did you have processes and kind of workflows figured out, or were you just starting from scratch trying to figure out how is this thing going to work?
I think it was a healthy mix of both. I think I had a really healthy idea of how things were supposed to work because the agency that I had just left was so put together and we were small. So everybody had a really good insight into what was going on behind the scenes and like on the books. So that was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it was just figuring things out as I went because I'm just one person. So that will be different than a studio setup. So it was a healthy mix of both,
Okay.
I
Okay.
think.
So one thing I really liked about meeting you at Camp MoGraph, I guess the second year, not the first year, was that you had a beautiful presentation, which was helped to find your style. Uh, Early in your freelance career, did you have your style figured out?
No.
What was that process like?
I think, to be quite honest, the workshop that I had put together was basically the all the thoughts that I had written down for myself when
Yeah.
I was going from being just an independent to a full-time freelance studio, so to speak. And so I had to go through that process myself of figuring out that kind of that mental transition of it's no longer my responsibility to be as palatable as possible to the entire world. That's not my job anymore. My job is to do work that I enjoy and that other people enjoy. And so it then became a process of what work do I have that I would want to do again? And that's what's allowed to stay on the website. And that's the kind of stuff that's allowed to live here because that's you attract what you put out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how long of freelancing did it take for you to go through that process?
It, I think, was ever evolving.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to tell myself, I think, to get started was that nothing's permanent. And I think without that thought, I wouldn't have started because I'm a very much usually in this mindset of everything has to be perfect before I can start. Everything's permanent, everything has to be right before I begin. And that's not true. And so once I kind of realized that like Ladybird is a living, breathing thing, it was so much easier to start knowing I can always adjust later on down the line. Everything is flexible. And that was really helpful.
What was one of the biggest business lessons you learned?
It's so stupid, but to have a contract for every
Yeah.
yeah,
Is
like
there a story there?
yes, everybody tells you to have a contract, and you know that like every Joey Cornman says it in his book probably like 25 times. But I always thought, oh, this is like a special circumstance. Like these people are too nice. It would be rude of me personally to burden them with a contract, and it always came from a place of like this particular client has never booked out for creative before. They've never worked with a vendor before. A contract would be
They
overwhelming.
don't know the process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I felt like I would overwhelm them with a contract, so I wanted out of just like a need to be friendly. I was like, "We'll just do this super casual, super chill." It was not chill. Those both of those projects were over a year long.
Ouch.
Yeah, truly, because they just wouldn't end because there was no contract stating that they needed to be over. So, I've learned.
So did they eventually just become approved, or was there a pushback point? How did that
Eventually,
end?
one of them ended simply because I had no gas left, and I was like, "Look, the where we're at in this project, you would be so more than equipped with what you need if you had a junior designer. I'm too much for you at this point.
Yeah.
And that was well received. The other one simply just had to end. And I said, this is the last render. It looks great. We're finished. And they loved the project. It was great. And then I shared it because I was happy about it. I share it and I immediately get an email from that client that says, you can't share that. That's my property now. And I was like, look, we don't actually have a contract. So there's no rule saying that I can't. So that's kind of when I learned. I was like, that I can't do again.
It's kind of a big deal.
I will not do that again. And you don't know till you know. You live, you learn, you laugh, you love, and you write a contract.
Did you go to a lawyer to have it specifically drafted for Ladybird, or just download templates online for lawyer stuff? What did you do?
I used back when it was still available. I don't believe it is anymore. The Motion Hatch.
Yeah, yep. I had that
Yes.
too.
Yep. That's the one I use.
All right. Is it still today?
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations, Haley.
Thank you very much.
So going through the growth of Ladybird, you got to a point where you're doing some pretty cool stuff. Would you
Yeah.
mind defining your style real quick?
Oh gosh, I should have taken my own workshop. I personally define my style as very like kitschy 50s fun, like Play-Doh almost. Just like anything that would fit into a children's book, I love to work on.
And doing that style naturally led to a pretty big contract with Disney Parks.
It did, yeah.
Tell me about how that process of that conversation came to be.
Absolutely hilarious because I can assure you that I have applied to the Walt Disney Company no less than 5 billion times. And I've kept record of every single application. And none of those panned out. Some of them I just wasn't ready.
Yeah.
Some of them, like, it just wasn't a good fit, and that's fine. But at the time, I was just like happily freelancing, just making my own stuff. And I was on LinkedIn and I got a message from a recruiter that was like, we have an opportunity at a big company. Do you want it? And I was like, you could not have given me less information, actually. But I was polite and I said, I'd love to learn more about this. Like, what is this? And she was like, oh, it's a position at Disney as an animator. And I was like, that sounds nice.
That sounds okay.
That
We
sounds
could do
incredible.
that.
I would love to chat about that. And so we chatted and they asked, it's for a position for a Lottie animator. And I was
Yeah.
like, great. That sounds really neat. What if we chat on Friday? Because it was, I think, probably a Monday. And I wanted time because I was not as familiar with Lottie as I could have been. And she was like, how about tomorrow?
And you're like, oh,
Incredible.
I will brush up.
Yeah, so no sleep was had between the offer of the interview and the interview itself. But from then, I think in about a week and a half, I had a position at Disney Parks. And that was absolutely wild to have chased it for so long. And then it just landed in my lap on a Tuesday.
When you received that official contract saying you are now working for Disney
Mhm.
Parks, how did you celebrate?
I didn't think it was real, to be totally honest.
Yeah?
And part of it was because it came through this contracting agency. So, like,
Am I being scammed here? What's going on?
totally. And I was like, I'm not sure, but like the invite says like Disney.Zoom. So, like, I'm pretty sure. So it took a while for it to feel real. And then, like,
Yeah.
a laptop came in the mail. And I was like, that feels pretty real. That feels pretty good. And then I opened the laptop up and there was like a Disney IT sticker on it. And at that point, I was like, oh, I work here. Okay, this is great.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So that's all remote.
Yes.
So that first Zoom call you hopped on,
Mm-hmm.
tell me about that emotionally.
I think I had all of my emotions before I got to the Zoom call because I was embarrassed at those coming out on the Zoom call. But it was a lot of like playing all of like, of course, like the 90s Disney songs as I got ready in the morning. It was very much like a Princess Diaries montage.
I'm just imagining like songbirds flying through your house. Just
Truly.
kinda-
I wore a skirt my first day of work because I felt like a princess. It was very cliche, but I absolutely loved it.
Oh, I love it. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, you've worked on some pretty cool projects. Anything you can talk about projects you've worked on?
Yeah,
in there?
absolutely. One of my personal faves, and these are all so like in the scheme of Walt Disney Parks, they are small things, but I absolutely adore them. One of my favorites has been I get to work with the PhotoPass team, and we work on activations and graphics that just kind of like add magic to guest photo experiences. And so one of those has been for the Epcot Food and Wine Festival. The Mickey pretzel is like an absolutely beloved park snack. And so I got to like 3D model a Mickey pretzel and have it fabricated. And now you can go to the parks and take a picture with like a 14-inch wide Mickey pretzel, which for me is so cool because so much of our work lives in a digital space.
They have a physical thing.
Exactly. To see my work like on Disney property in a physical way, that's incredible. That's so cool to me.
So right before filming today, I had to brush up on your demo reel, so I want to make sure I checked it out properly. There was one on there that I didn't expect to see, that I was kind of surprised by, was the Cinnamon Toast Crunch squares.
Yeah, they're
I
still there.
I was like, I didn't know she worked on that. That is
Yeah.
super cool.
Yeah.
Tell me about that project.
So that I hope it doesn't like let the air out of the tires, but that was actually a spec project
Okay.
where for my old agency that I was working at the time, there wasn't a ton of character capacity at that studio. So when I started, that was kind of I was filling that gap. And
Yeah.
so we had an ask from an agency that said, you know, we're bidding to work on a Cinnamon Toast Crunch project. If we get it, we'd like to hire y'all to make it. But essentially, can you equip us with anything to help us win this bid?
Absolutely.
Which they asked that on a Friday and it was due on a Monday. So like that didn't happen, but it did start this process of like, well, that's a good question. Like, what do we have to win pitches like this? And so that motivated this like big internal spec project of this kind of now fictional goal of winning a Cinnamon Toast Crunch bid. And so it kind of became this test of, you know, as a studio, what can we offer character wise? As our new hire, what can you offer
Right.
character wise? And we were trying to push our render engines kind of to its limits and see what it could do.
Sounds a little bit like trial by fire.
It really was. And what was neat about the project was that the commercial itself isn't one like overarching story. It's a lot of like little vignettes.
Yeah.
And so each vignette let us test something wildly different. Like, what can we, like, we had this crazy tongue rig for these Cinnamon Toast Crunch characters. Like, one shot can be totally devoted to pushing the tongue rig to its limit. And
Yeah.
one shot can be totally dedicated to experimenting with like treating the sugar particles as, you know, with physics or whatever. So it let us explore a lot of different unrelated things in one big project, which was very cool.
That is kind of cool. I like
Yeah.
that. I like that. I want to throw it back to the very beginning of Ladybird real quick.
Yes.
Because that branding is just, it's on lockdown.
Thank
It
you.
is nice.
Thank you.
Was it nice day one?
I will say, I think I had a very clear vision of it from the beginning. It was more so just like, it's like when you have a dream when you're trying to like talk
Yeah.
about it. And so that was, I just keep touching this, I'm sorry. That was, I think the big challenge was I had the picture, but I just needed to nail down the vibe and
Yeah.
what vibe did I want to live with for a very long time. And so I was really lucky. I think that all the sketches look very much the same. It was just fine tuning.
That's the hard thing to achieve.
It really was. And to be fair, like Ladybird's not the first name I landed on. So I
Yeah.
had a lot of like,
Do you mind sharing the original?
I really thought I was going to be Lemon for a
Lemon.
while. Like,
That's really funny. The last interview I filmed was Lemon Lee.
No way.
For reals.
that's awesome. No shade to that name. I think it's a great name.
Yeah.
I just couldn't come up with the branding to sell it. So
Yeah,
I
that's
moved
fair.
on.
That's fair. That's fair. So you started that branding. The branding. You have Ladybird. Things are kind of jiving. They're feeling good. Was there a certain project that made you feel like, yeah, I'm crushing this. I've got this.
I think the first project that really made me like pinch myself a little bit was when this studio that I had never worked with before landed in my inbox and they were like, "Hi, we have a project with Google. We'd love to bring you on." I was like, Who are you? Like, where did you come from?" And so that was a huge break for me, I think. And it was I was already booked with another client at that point, but their projects had proven to be very, very tame, very easy. Which you still want to do those to like the
Yeah.
extent of your ability, but it became I'm going to need to double book myself to make this work. So shout out to Matthias, my husband, who fed me through an IV for that entire week while I was double booked on that project because I couldn't let a Google project go.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's when I felt like I might be onto something here. So
I love that. I love that. So I'm curious, from how has your vision for your career changed from the conception of Ladybird?
yeah, I think when I first started, my goals were so like immediate. Like my very first goal was, can I make any money at all?
Yeah.
Because I've already dropped dollar on cinema and Arnold and Creative Suite, all these things that at the time are so much money when you're not making money.
Absolutely.
So that was my very first goal was, can I literally make anything? And then my second goal became, if I can make as much as I was making at my old job, then this will feel like a real job.
Thing. Yeah.
Right. And so within 6 months, I'd hit that point. I was like, that was like way faster than I thought it would be. So then the goals just kind of kept evolving. And so now that I think I've proven to myself that like Ladybird Animation is a real job, it's not make believe anymore. And I'm not playing dress up anymore as an animator. I'm actually doing it.
Yeah.
Now that I think I've satisfied that, I think my goals are much more, how can I make this the most creatively fulfilling thing in my life, as opposed to just making sure bills are paid, because we're there now and that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So what's the next step for you?
I think the next step is going to be pushing Ladybird into a much more like personal work space, because I think I've proven to myself I can do the client work and I love the client work, but it's been a long time since I've done really personal stuff. So I think a really big personal project is going to be the next big thing. And then taking that kind of almost more into like the teaching space,
Yeah.
making personal work and breaking it down to help other people learn from it.
That kind of throws back a little bit to the workshop you presented at Camp MoGraph. You've
Mhm.
presented for Maxon, you presented for SIGGraph,
Mhm.
A&M. When did teaching and workshops come into your repertoire of things you wanted to do?
It was not something I planned on at all, and it was funny that the first time that presented itself, so all of my schooling was in Maya. When I got my first job, they said, "Great, we don't use that at all. We use Cinema 4D," and I was
At
like,
least it's easier to learn.
I will say, yes, it is. And so I was like, great, I'll learn that this weekend, I guess. And so I had been working in cinema for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 months when I went to a MoGraph meetup in Dallas, and Matthias said, "Hey, we're looking for presenters. Do you want to present?" And I was like, "Are you sure? I've been doing this for 2 months. I don't think." And he was like, "Yeah, go for it." And so I knew that it was important. I knew that was an awesome opportunity that I needed to be ready for.
Yeah.
So that's it literally dropped in my lap, and I did everything I could to be ready for it when it came around, and I think I was, and it kind of started this new avenue of like public speaking and workshops that I never planned on doing, but really enjoy.
I think it's really cool how it's easy to pivot throughout your career and say, I'm starting Ladybird to be an animator, do my own thing because I need a job.
Right?
Well, we're crushing that, and then you land this dream job you've been chasing for years
Yeah.
at Disney parks, and now you're able to say, I'm still enjoying teaching and stuff, but not something I thought I'd focus on. But now you're doing more of it.
Mhm.
Um, just how has pivoting your goals through the years been a beneficial thing for you?
I think it's really something my aunt said to me a long time ago was I was at a place where like I wasn't loving my job and I was really struggling, and she said, "I know this feels tough right now, but when you look back, you will see that all of these steps were connected and they all got you to where you want to be." And I think about that all the time when I'm in a spot that doesn't feel like good or comfortable.
Yeah.
And I look back and realize she's totally right. All of these steps have all been important and they've all been beneficial even when they weren't comfortable. And so I think all of these pivots, they no longer scare me. They're more like, "Oh, this is a fun new thing and this will lead to something else that's probably also new and fun." So I'm excited for it.
You're going to see a new vision, something you haven't experienced before. I
Yeah.
love that. So, because the goal of FrameOne is to help inspire those that would like to go from full time employed to freelance or from freelance to starting a studio, uh, making that leap,
Hmm.
what advice would you give someone who is getting ready to try freelancing?
I think one of the big things that I needed to hear was just to start before you're ready. Because again, I never would have started because I never felt 1000% ready, but I also had no choice. So that really, really helped. And I think starting before you're ready, but also doing your homework is a huge, huge benefit that I'd recommend. So, of course, I know we've already mentioned like Christo's The Future podcast, Joey Corman's book, Chutzpah's Freelance and Business and Stuff, such valuable resources. And then I would just say that like it's just one step at a time. It's absolutely one step at a time, and you take bad steps and then you take better steps. So it's just a flexible living thing.
Do you feel that there's ever a point where you do feel comfortable and confident in it, or is it just, you just have to start?
I think you do feel comfortable and confident for small windows at a time. And those are great little windows, but you learn from the other windows. So I think it just like it's a cycle and you get comfortable in that cycle and you kind of start to learn, oh, this when I feel this way, this is when I'm growing. When I feel this way, this is when I've hit my stride and that's great. And then I'll probably have more learning to do later.
That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Is there a business tip or I should I'm gonna rephrase that. I'm gonna give you the option. That's what we're gonna do
Oh,
here. We can either go down the route of do you want to provide a business tip for someone that wants to start out,
okay.
or do we want to talk about the hard work that's required to make this thing successful from the get go?
Oh gosh. Okay, I'll start with the business tip first. I think that staying as small as you can for as long as you can in your startup phase is extremely important because I think when you start, all you have is overhead. You are nothing but overhead. And so keeping it as small and lean as you can is so crucial. And what I see a lot is especially because like we're designers, so you want everything to look good.
Yeah.
So I think it's really easy to get caught up in. I've started a studio. I need to brand the studio. Therefore, I need to brand my space. I need to brand my surround. And you just like that, it starts to escalate
Yeah.
so fast. And what I see a lot is like I'll be like in a coffee shop or something, and I'll see a coffee shop that's like selling their own merch.
Yep.
but the shelves are entirely full because none of it is selling, because nobody is excited about your brand as you are. And that's fine. That is totally fine. But when I see that, it reminds me, you know what? A Ladybird pin would be so cute. A whole set of Ladybird pins would be the bomb, but I can't do that right now. I cannot do that right now. And so that reminder of just like staying small for a long
I
time
think you might be
is
close to selling some pins.
maybe I could, but you shouldn't have told me that because I think it's just so that part of the business is so fun and it's easy to get swept away in it. And you totally can later, but when you're starting, I think just staying small, staying lean is a good move.
Do you outsource anything?
I don't actually.
Wow.
Yeah, which I'm lucky because I'm so small that I can afford to work that way. But that was one of those things I had learned from that. Not that outsourcing's bad, but from the studio that I worked with that I didn't love. One
Yeah.
of their big pillars was like outsourcing a lot of work and not telling their clients about it. So our clients would come in house and ask questions, and nobody knew the answer because we weren't doing the work. The guys we hired out were doing the work, and I hated that. I didn't like that at all. And so that's one of my pillars as Ladybird is if you hire Ladybird, you're getting me.
That's a lot of skills to have to master.
That is fair. I have had to trim down a little bit on what Ladybird can offer because it's important to me for that to
Okay.
be an
Okay.
honest interaction. Because if like there's so many vendors to choose from
Yeah.
in the world, and if
Yeah.
someone has chosen Ladybird, that's such an honor, and I so want to respect that. So I want to make sure that if you have gone out on a limb to book Ladybird, that you are getting Ladybird. You're not getting a vendor that you've never seen before.
That's a really cool mentality. I like
Yeah.
that. I like that. So we're gonna pivot back to hard work then.
Yes.
Talk about the early startup phase. What it took, what it required from like a time, from an energy, from a work life balance point to
Mhm.
get to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the work life balance definitely was far more work than life when I was first starting. But at the same time, I'm very lucky in that I enjoy all of these things I'm doing. So that line's very blurry. And sometimes that's healthy and sometimes it's not. But I think when I first started, it was very much like curating this image and curating, the luxury of freelance is getting to choose who you work with and choose who you attract. And so to do that, I have to choose what I put out.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of it. And at the time, a lot of the client work I had didn't speak to the work I wanted to be doing. So it turned into doing a lot of personal work that did look like what I wanted. So it was a lot of just like building a portfolio that put out an image that I wanted to continue with. And once that was established, then I found I could kind of like take my foot off the gas a bit and then just let things happen. And it took a while to get to that point, but it needed to be done, I think.
Starting a business
Yeah.
is really hard. Whether it's freelance or the studio, it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
It's hard.
Yeah.
What are some times that you struggled or you failed?
Great question. Because I did plenty of those things. I think there was a lot of calling my dad involved because there were just a lot of like convincing myself that it was okay to spend money before I was making money. That was really tough for me to come to terms with. Understanding that it's not reasonable to expect all of your clients to pay you in a paper check. Like sometimes you're going to have to eat the credit card fee. Like
Yeah.
things like that
Yeah.
just like didn't click for a long time. But then at the same time, you go through those seasons where you're just not booked for a while. And then you've got family asking, have you worked in a while? And they always mean well. They're always checking, like they always mean so well. But having to say, no, I haven't been booked in a while, like that feels like failure.
I've been on an extended vacation now.
Exactly. But I think it's very much a mental shift when you can realize that's not failure. That's a break that I very much needed because I've been double booked for 6 weeks, So like it's all a mental game, I think.
Absolutely. We're not robots. We are human.
Yeah.
I would like to talk to you about mentorship. Do you
Yes.
have a mentor?
Not currently, but I think also I don't have a formal mentor. I think I kind of absorb just like leadership kind of wherever I'm at. And so at my old job, I think I definitely found mentorship in my old creative director. He was phenomenal in the way that he went about not only client interactions, but just like creativity in general. I absolutely adored. So Cody Clack.
Boom. There it is. Shout out.
Yes, I still very much like take in a lot of what he taught me during the time that I was at that studio. So, yeah.
Do you feel like what you learned there was just a major contributing factor to your success?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Before that job, I had no idea, even like how to set up an After Effects project. I had absolutely no idea. I didn't know what pre-comps were. I didn't know anything. So, from a technical level, a lot of what I learned in that job like kept me afloat, but at the same time, so much of it was the interpersonal part of running a creative business and seeing how people do that. And one of my favorite things that Cody ever taught me was our producer would come in and say, hey, I need this thing by 3 p.m. Can I have it? And I would say, yes. But, and then I would list every single thing that could ever possibly go wrong because I thought I was giving her all the information she needed. Like, yes, you can have this, but not if the render farm explodes. Yes, you can have this, but if my computer crashes, maybe not. Like, that's not helpful information.
Right.
But I would give it all to her thinking that was thorough. By, comparison, she would ask Cody, can I have this thing by 3 p.m.? And he would say, you gotcha. Like, you bet. And I was like, how can you be so confident in that answer? What if something goes wrong? And he was like, well, then we figure it out. We figure it out. I will figure it out. I'm confident that I can figure it out. And that's when I learned the big difference in being a yes person versus a yes but person. There's so much more confidence when you talk to the yes person.
Yep.
And so that's
You're
who
not
I'm
giving them a reason to doubt.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's who I'm trying to be, is the yes person.
There was a piece of advice that I received from Steven Anderson at Swarovski. He said, don't worry about it. It's just marketing.
Hey.
And I'm like, we can do that?
Yeah.
We can just like not freak out about this thing potentially not getting out the door at 4 o'clock?
Exactly.
Yeah, we're not saving lives, just marketing.
I know. It's wild.
Well, cool. Alex, thank you so much for being on FrameOne. I really appreciate it. It's been great talking to you today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.